Welcome to Sci-Fi Scroll, your gateway to galaxies far, far away. If you're ready to explore epic adventures, futuristic worlds, and mind-bending tales brought to life, you're in the right place. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up to stay tuned for all the sci-fi stories your imagination craves. Let's dive into the unknown. Chapter 4. Pirate Ambush. The stellar horizon cut through the black void of space, its aging engines humming steadily, a sound that was both comforting and worrisome, like an old dog still managing to keep up with the pack. Outside, the ship skirted the edge of a sprawling nebula, its swirling colors stretching endlessly across the viewport. Deep violets and electric blues twisted together in mesmerizing patterns, illuminated by the faint glow of distant stars. Ethan Drake lounged in the cockpit, his boots propped up on the console in blatant disregard for ship protocol. Not that he cared. His arms were crossed behind his head, and his gaze rested on the nebula, though he wasn't really looking at it. Sure, it was beautiful, in a giant space cloud of potential death kind of way, but Ethan wasn't the type to get sentimental about celestial phenomena. Pretty, isn't it? Zara's voice crackled through the comms panel, breaking the silence. Ethan smirked, his fingers lazily tapping the edge of the console. He leaned forward and pressed the comms button. If you like giant clouds of gas, sure. Personally, I prefer things that don't explode when you get too close. Romantic as always, Captain, Zara replied, her tone dripping with sarcasm. You ever think about writing poetry? You've got a real way with words. Yeah, I'll get started on my epic space sonnet right after I figure out how to keep this bucket of bolts from falling apart, Ethan shot back. Don't forget the part where you're tragically misunderstood, Zara quipped. Anything I should be worried about up there? Ethan glanced at the console, the familiar readouts blinking back at him. Everything was running smoothly for once, not that he trusted it. Just the usual, he said. Empty space, questionable engine performance, and, oh yeah, our cargo being a giant pirate magnet. You know, the normal stuff. Good to know, Zara said with a chuckle. I'll keep the coffee warm. Warm. Appreciate it, Ethan replied, before cutting the comms. He leaned back in his chair again, letting out a long breath. The hum of the ship's engines filled the silence, a sound he knew better than the voice of any former lover. It had been a hell of a few days. Between the revelations about the Star Core prism, Lirae's infuriating secrecy, and the constant itch between his shoulder blades that screamed you're being watched, Ethan hadn't had much time to breathe. Now, with the ship cruising at a steady pace and no immediate crises to handle, he was determined to steal a moment of peace. He closed his eyes, his boots still on the console, and let himself relax. Just a little. Naturally, that's when the alarms started blaring. Ethan's eyes snapped open as the cockpit was flooded with flashing red lights, the shrill sound of the warning klaxon drilling into his skull. He shot upright, his boots hitting the floor with a loud thud. For crying out loud, he muttered, slapping the comms button. Zara, what the hell is going on? Don't look at me. Zara's voice crackled back, louder this time. It's your cockpit, Captain. You tell me. No. Ethan scowled and turned to the console, his hands flying over the controls. The scanners were lighting up like a fireworks display, a cluster of signals quickly closing in on their position. Well, that's just fantastic, he muttered, his tone dripping with sarcasm. What is it? Zara asked, her voice laced with concern. Looks like we've got company, Ethan replied. Multiple bogies incoming. Too fast for freighters. Too erratic for standard patrols. My guess? Pirates. Pirates. Of course it's pirates, Zara groaned. Because why wouldn't it be pirates? Can we ever just have a nice quiet cruise through space? Not in this lifetime, Ethan said, flipping a few switches to bring up the ship's tactical readout. Tarek, get your ass to the engine room. I want every ounce of speed this tin can's got, and then some. The comms crackled. On it, Tarek's gravelly voice replied. But if you push these engines any harder, they're gonna blow faster than Zara's poker face. Hey! Zara snapped. Priorities, people. Ethan barked. Lirae, get to the bridge. And bring that diplomatic comm of yours, because we're gonna need it. As if on cue, the cockpit door hissed open, and Lirae stepped inside. Her expression was as composed as ever, though her sharp gaze immediately flicked to the flashing lights and the scanner readouts. What's the situation? She asked, her tone calm and professional, as if they were discussing dinner plans instead of imminent danger. Ethan gestured to the console. Why? Multiple ships, closing fast. No ID, no comms. My money's on pirates, but hey, maybe it's just a friendly neighborhood welcoming committee. Want to go out there and ask? Lirae arched an eyebrow at him, her calm demeanor unshaken. I assume you have a plan, Captain? Working on it, Ethan said, his fingers flying across the controls. He brought up a map of the surrounding sector, his eyes scanning for anything useful. The nebula stretched out in all directions, a swirling mass of gas and debris. It wasn't exactly the safest place to hide, but it was better than nothing. All right, he said, pointing to the map. We're heading into the nebula. The gas and radiation should mess with their scanners, buy us some time. And if they follow us in? Lirae asked. Then we hope they're as bad at flying as they are at being decent human beings, Ethan replied with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. Lirae's gaze lingered on him for a moment, her expression unreadable. Very well, she said finally. I'll leave the flying to you. Generous of you, Ethan muttered, flipping the ship to manual control. He grabbed the yoke and adjusted their course, the stellar horizon groaning in protest as it angled toward the nebula. Sarah, keep an eye on their position, Ethan said. Tarek, I want those engines running like they've got something to prove. Yeah. Tarek grumbled over the comms. Just don't get us killed, all right? No promises, Ethan replied, gripping the controls tighter as the ship plunged toward the swirling colors of the nebula. The alarms were still blaring, the scanners flashing warnings about the incoming ships. Ethan's jaw tightened, his focus narrowing to the task at hand. All right, stellar horizon, he muttered under his breath. Let's see if you've got one more trick left in you. And with that, they disappeared into the nebula, the swirling colors swallowing the ship whole. Ethan bolted upright, his boots hitting the floor with a dull thud as the cockpit lights bathed everything in an ominous red glow. The shrill, mechanical voice of the ship's alert system echoed through the stellar horizon, monotone but somehow still panic-inducing. Proximity alert. Hostile vessel detected. What the hell now? Ethan muttered, already reaching for the controls. His stomach dropped as the scanner display lit up with a series of angry blips. The readings were unmistakable. A massive ship was closing in fast. Sleek, heavily armed, and sporting the unmistakable skull and crossbones, insignia of the Black Nebula pirates. Of course it's pirates, Ethan groaned, dragging a hand down his face. Because why not? Perfect end to a perfect day. He slammed his fist on the intercom button, his voice sharp and urgent. All hands, we've got incoming. Strap in, grab a weapon, and try not to die. That's an order. The door behind him hissed open, and Ethan didn't need to look to know who it was. Lirae always made an entrance. A calm, measured presence even when the universe was actively trying to kill them. But this time, there was a new edge to her movements. Her usual composed demeanor had been replaced by a sharp, focused energy, as if she could sense just how bad this was. What's happening? She asked, stepping into the cockpit with purpose. Ethan didn't glance up, his hands flying over the controls as he adjusted their course. Pirates, he said tightly. Big, mean, armed to the teeth pirates. You know, the fun kind. Lirae moved closer, her eyes flicking to the scanner display. The black nebula ship loomed on the screen like a predator stalking its prey. She didn't flinch, but her expression hardened. Can we outrun them? Ethan barked out a bitter laugh, jerking the controls to the side as the ship's engines groaned in protest. Not unless you've got a spare warp drive hidden in that fancy dress of yours, he shot back. They're faster, they're stronger, and they're about 30 seconds from turning us into space debris. The ship shuddered violently as a warning shot from the pirate vessel streaked past, close enough to rattle the hull. Sparks rained down from a nearby console, and Ethan swore under his breath. Tarek, he bellowed into the intercom. I need those engines singing yesterday. The comms crackled with static before Tarek's gravelly voice came through. I'm giving you everything she's got, Captain. But this old girl ain't built for sprints. Well, she'd better learn fast. Ethan snapped, cutting the comms. Lirae stepped closer to the command console, her voice calm but firm. What do you need me to do? Ethan froze for a half second, his fingers hovering over the controls. He turned to look at her, surprised by the question. What do I need you to do? He repeated, his tone incredulous. I need you to stay out of the way, Princess. Let me. The ship rocked violently as a blast from the pirate vessel grazed the hull. The impact sent sparks flying from the console, and Ethan swore loudly, gripping the controls tighter. Forget it, he muttered through gritted teeth. Hold on to something. This is gonna get messy. Lirae grabbed the edge of the console to steady herself as Ethan yanked the controls hard to the left, sending the stellar horizon into a stomach-churning roll. The ship's engine screamed in protest, and the cockpit lights flickered ominously. Zara! Nee! Ethan barked into the comms. I need a sitrep. How close are they? Zara's voice crackled through the speakers, tight with tension. Close enough to smell us, Cap. They're locking weapons. Looks like plasma cannons and maybe a missile or two. You want the good news or the bad news first? Just give me the bad news. Ethan snapped. Their targeting systems are top-notch, Zara said. They'll pick us apart before we even make it to the nebula. And the good news? They haven't fired the missiles yet? Zara offered weakly. Ethan groaned. Not exactly comforting, Zara. Hey, you ass? Another blast rocked the ship. Closer this time. Ethan's fingers tightened around the controls as he pushed the aging freighter to its limits, weaving through the black void with the precision of someone who'd spent more time in cockpits than on solid ground. Captain, Lirae said, her voice cutting through the chaos. If we can't outrun them, we need to outthink them. Ethan shot her a sidelong glance, his expression somewhere between annoyed and impressed. Oh, great. Now's the part where you tell me to use diplomacy, right? Maybe invite them over for tea, and hope they don't shoot us. Lirae didn't rise to the bait. You said they're faster and stronger? She said, her tone steady. But they're also larger, correct? Yeah, Ethan admitted, frowning. So what? So, Lirae continued, her gaze sharp. We use that against them. A ship that size will struggle to maneuver in tight spaces. If we can lure them into a debris field or an asteroid cluster. They'll have to slow down, Ethan finished, catching on. A grin tugged at the corner of his mouth. Not bad, Princess. Not bad at all. Zara, Lirae said, turning toward the comm panel. Are there any navigational hazards nearby? Checking now, Zara replied, her fingers flying over her console. A beat later, she let out a triumphant whoop. Bingo! There's a debris field about 20 clicks out. It's tight, though. One wrong move, and we'll be toast. Better us than them, Ethan said, adjusting their course. Tarek, hold those engines together for just a little longer. We're about to pull some moves this old girl wasn't designed for. Great, Tarek muttered over the comms. Just what I wanted to hear. Ethan gripped the controls, his jaw set as the stellar horizon hurtled toward the debris field. The pirate ship was still gaining, its weapons lighting up the void with deadly precision. Another blast streaked past, close enough to heat the cockpit's viewport. All right, Ethan muttered under his breath. Let's see how these bastards like a little space obstacle course. The debris field loomed ahead, a chaotic mess of shattered ships, twisted metal, and floating wreckage. It was a pilot's nightmare, and their only chance. Everyone hold on, Ethan shouted, steering the ship into the field at breakneck speed. The stellar horizon groaned in protest, the hull vibrating as they scraped past a jagged hunk of metal. Behind them, the pirate ship hesitated, its larger frame struggling to navigate the tight spaces. Come on, Ethan muttered, his eyes glued to the viewport. Just a little closer. Another blast rocked the stellar horizon, but Ethan didn't flinch. He could feel the adrenaline coursing through his veins, his hands steady on the controls. Captain, Lirae said quietly, her gaze fixed on the scanner. They're slowing down. Ethan's grin widened. That's what I thought. Zara, get ready to fire up the warp drive as soon as we're clear. On it, Cap, Zara said, her voice tinged with relief. As the stellar horizon weaved through the debris, the pirate ship fell further behind, its massive bulk struggling to keep up. Looks like we're not toast after all, Ethan said, leaning back slightly as the tension in his shoulders eased. For now, Lirae replied, though there was a faint hint of approval in her tone. Ethan smirked, his confidence returning in full force. Stick with me, Princess. I always deliver. Despite Ethan's best efforts to shake them, the pirate's ship slammed into the stellar horizon with a thunderous clang, the sound reverberating through the freighter like a death knell. Grappling hooks tore into the hull with a sickening screech, locking the two ships together. Ethan felt the shudder of impact in his bones as metal groaned under the strain. Damn it, he growled, slamming a fist against the console. The alarms erupted moments later, a deafening chorus of blaring sirens and flashing red lights. The ship's systems, ever helpful, chimed in with their usual lack of bedside manner. Unauthorized access detected. Breach in progress. Hull integrity compromised. Yeah, no kidding, Ethan muttered through gritted teeth. Sarah's panicked voice screamed over the intercom. Nilindil. They're boarding. Ethan, they're. I know, Ethan barked, cutting her off as he yanked his blaster from the wall. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, checking the weapon's charge and flipping the safety off in one smooth motion. The cockpit door hissed open, and Lirae stepped inside, her movements calm but purposeful. Ethan barely spared her a glance before snapping. Where are you going? To help, she replied simply, her voice infuriatingly composed as she adjusted the sleek, compact weapon holstered at her side. Ethan turned to face her fully, momentarily thrown by her unflappable demeanor. You do realize these are pirates, right? Big, scary, shoot-you-in-the-face pirates. Not the kind you can negotiate with over tea and biscuits. Lirae arched an elegant eyebrow, her tone dry as desert air. Thank you for the clarification, Captain. Now, move. Ethan stared at her for half a second longer, his brain scrambling to reconcile the poised diplomat in front of him with the fact that she was marching headfirst into a firefight. This better not be one of those noble sacrifice moves, he muttered, falling in step behind her as they exited the cockpit. I'm not in the mood to write a eulogy. If it comes to that, Lirae said without breaking stride, I'm certain you'd keep it brief. Damn right I would, Ethan shot back. Something like, "Here lies Lirae Vash." She was smart, shiny, and terrible at following orders. Ellie. Lirae glanced over her shoulder, her expression almost amused. "Let's hope it doesn't come to that then." The ship shuddered violently as the pirates began cutting through the hull, the sound of plasma torches whining through the corridors. Ethan could feel the tension building like a coiled spring, the distant clang of boots on metal echoing as the invaders made their way inside. "Zara!" Ethan barked into his comms as they reached the central corridor. "Status update. They're cutting through the aft hatch." Zara's voice crackled back, still tinged with panic. "Looks like a dozen of them, maybe more. I've locked down the cargo bay, but if they get past me..." "Don't let them get past you," Ethan cut in, his tone sharp but steady. "And Zara? Don't do anything stupid." "Define stupid," Zara shot back, though her voice had steadied slightly. "Blowing yourself up counts," Ethan replied. "Noted," Zara said dryly before the comms cut out. Ethan and Lirae reached the junction near the aft hatch, just as Tarek came barreling around the corner, a hefty wrench in one hand and a shotgun slung over his shoulder. "About time you showed up," Tarek grumbled, his expression grim. "What's the plan?" "Plan? Plan?" Ethan echoed, glancing at the mechanic. "I thought you were the plan." Tarek snorted. "Great. We're doomed." "We hold them here," Lirae interjected, stepping forward. Her tone was calm, but commanding, and for a brief moment, even Tarek looked like he might actually listen to her. "If they breach the cargo hold, the mission is compromised." Ethan rolled his eyes. "Oh, fantastic. Thanks for the reminder, Your Highness. I was just starting to forget how screwed we are." Before Lirae could respond, the sound of metal giving way echoed through the corridor, followed by the unmistakable hiss of pressurized air escaping. "They're in!" Tarek barked, raising his shotgun. The aft hatch blew open with a deafening boom, and the first wave of Black Nebula pirates stormed through. They were as intimidating as Ethan had expected. Tall, broad-shouldered, and clad in patched-together armor that looked like it had seen more battles than their ship. Their leader, a scarred brute with a plasma rifle slung across his chest, let out a guttural roar as he charged forward. "Hold the line," Ethan shouted, raising his blaster and firing off a quick burst. The first pirate through the breach went down with a grunt, crumpling to the floor as smoke curled from the smoking hole in his chest plate. Tarek let out a gleeful laugh as he pumped his shotgun and fired, the deafening boom echoing through the corridor. "That's what you get, you ugly son of a..." "Focus, Tarek," Ethan snapped, ducking behind a bulkhead as a volley of plasma bolts sizzled past his head. Lirae, to Ethan's surprise, didn't hesitate. She moved with a precision that spoke of training, taking cover behind a nearby support beam and firing off measured shots with her compact blaster. Her aim was disturbingly accurate. Every shot found its mark, dropping pirates one by one. Ethan spared her a glance, momentarily distracted by how completely unbothered she looked. "Remind me never to piss you off," he muttered, popping out of cover to fire another burst. "Consider it noted," Lirae replied coolly, her voice steady, even as a plasma bolt scorched the bulkhead inches from her head. The corridor was a cacophony of gunfire, shouted orders, and the metallic clang of boots and bodies hitting the floor. The pirates kept coming, relentless and heavily armed, but the crew of the Stellar Horizon held their ground. "Zara! Hi!" Ethan barked into his comms, firing off another shot. "How's it looking from your end?" "Still holding the cargo bay," Zara replied, her voice strained. "But they're trying to cut through the side hatch now. I don't think I can." "Hold them as long as you can," Ethan cut in. "We're almost done here." "Define." "Almost." Zara snapped back before the line went dead. "Run." Ethan ducked as another pirate fired at him, the shot grazing the edge of his cover. He glanced at Tarek, who was reloading, and Lirae, who was still calmly picking off targets like she was at a shooting range. "All right," Ethan muttered under his breath. "Let's finish this." The corridors of the stellar horizon were a war zone. Smoke filled the air, mingling with the acrid stench of scorched metal and burning circuitry. The sound of blaster fire ricocheted through the halls, punctuated by shouts, grunts, and the occasional clang as something, or someone, hit the deck hard. The pirates stormed through the breached airlocks like a pack of rabid wolves, their weapons blazing and their laughter ringing out like some twisted battle hymn. They were a motley crew, scarred, armored, and grinning like they were having the time of their lives. The crew fought back with everything they had, which, admittedly, wasn't much. Tarek was up front, swinging a massive wrench like a madman, his wild swings keeping the pirates at bay. Sarah crouched behind a stack of crates, her normally steady hands trembling as she squeezed off potshots with a battered blaster. Even Jensen, the timid young engineer, who usually avoided conflict like it was a contagious disease, had joined the fray, wielding a makeshift stun baton with surprising determination. Ethan and Lirae arrived just in time to see a group of pirates charging toward the engine room, their weapons raised and their intent clear. "Not today," Ethan muttered, raising his blaster. He fired off 3 quick shots, dropping 2 of the pirates before they even realized they were being attacked. The remaining pirates skidded to a halt, shouting in surprise. They spun around, their weapons spitting red-hot plasma as they returned fire. Ethan cursed under his breath and ducked behind a bulkhead, the hail of blaster bolts chewing into the walls around him. Lirae slid into cover beside him, her movements fluid and precise. She didn't look panicked. If anything, she looked more irritated than anything else. "This is your fault, you know," Ethan said, shouting over the chaos as he leaned out to fire a few more shots. "My fault?" Lirae echoed, her tone calm despite the blaster fire tearing through the corridor. "How, exactly, is this my fault?" "If you'd told me what we were carrying," Ethan snapped, ducking back as a bolt narrowly missed his head, "I could Could what?" she interrupted, her voice cold and steady. "Painted the ship with a sign that says, 'Nothing valuable here'? Because I'm sure that would have worked." Ethan opened his mouth to retort, but before he could get a word out, one of the pirates rounded the corner, a vicious-looking blade gleaming in his hand. The man snarled as he lunged at Lirae, his eyes wild and his intentions clear. "Lirae!" Ethan shouted, raising his blaster. But there was no need. Lirae moved like a whip crack, her body a blur of precision and efficiency. She sidestepped the pirate's initial swing, ducking low as the blade whistled harmlessly over her head. Before the man could recover, she twisted his arm with a sharp, practiced motion, forcing him to drop the blade with a pained grunt. Ethan watched, wide-eyed, as Lirae slammed the pirate into the nearby wall with enough force to rattle the bulkhead. The man crumpled to the floor, unconscious before he even hit the ground. "What the hell?" Ethan started, staring at her in disbelief. "Focus, Captain," Lirae said briskly, brushing a stray strand of hair from her face as she picked up the pirate's weapon and tossed it aside like garbage. "We're not finished." Ethan blinked, his brain scrambling to catch up. "Since when do diplomats know hand-to-hand combat?" "Since always," Lirae replied, her tone clipped. "Now, unless you'd like to discuss my resume further, I suggest you concentrate on the pirates currently trying to kill us." "Right," Ethan muttered, shaking his head as he turned back to the fight. "Good talk." The pirates weren't giving up. Another group charged down the corridor, their leader barking orders as they fired wildly in Ethan and Lirae's direction. "Cover me!" Ethan shouted, leaning out to return fire. Lirae didn't respond verbally, but she moved into position without hesitation, her blaster firing in sharp, controlled bursts. Ethan had to admit, she was a damn good shot. Every bolt found its mark, dropping pirates with precision that made his own firing feel downright sloppy in comparison. "Remind me to never piss you off," Ethan muttered, as he took out one of the remaining pirates with a shot to the chest. "I believe you've already accomplished that," Lirae replied dryly, her gaze never leaving the advancing enemy. Ethan barked out a laugh despite himself, the tension in his chest easing just slightly. "Fair point." Behind them, Tarek's voice boomed over the comms. "Captain, we've got a situation down here." "You don't say," Ethan shot back, ducking as another volley of plasma bolts scorched the wall inches from his head. "They're cutting into the secondary engine room," Tarek growled. "If they take that, we're dead in the water." Ethan swore under his breath. "How many?" "Too many," Tarek replied. "And I'm running out of ammo." "Hold your ground," Ethan barked. "We'll be there as soon as we..." Another pirate lunged at him, forcing Ethan to cut himself off mid-sentence. He swung his blaster like a club, catching the man across the jaw and sending him sprawling. "Busy," Ethan finished, panting slightly as he turned back to Lirae. "We need to move. Now." "Now." Lirae nodded, already stepping over the unconscious pirate at her feet. "Lead the way, Captain." Ethan smirked, raising his blaster as they began their charge down the corridor. "Try to keep up, Princess." The fight was far from over, but Ethan couldn't deny the rush of adrenaline surging through his veins. The stellar horizon might have been outgunned, outnumbered, and one step away from falling apart, but as long as he had a crew willing to fight, and a diplomat who apparently moonlighted as a one-woman strike team, he wasn't ready to call it quits just yet. The battle inside the stellar horizon raged on, the halls an utter mess of smoke, sparks, and bodies, some groaning, others not. Blaster bolts tore through the air, leaving scorch marks on the walls, and a smell that Ethan could only describe as burnt despair. And through it all, Lirae moved like a force of nature. Ethan had seen trained soldiers before. Hell, he'd served with a few back in the day, but Lirae was something else entirely. She wasn't just efficient, she was surgical. Every movement had purpose, every strike landed with precision. It was almost elegant. "Sure, why not?" Ethan muttered to himself as he crouched behind a crate and fired off a few shots. A diplomat who fights like a damn assassin. Totally normal. Lirae, meanwhile, had launched herself into the fray without hesitation. She darted through the chaos with a grace that made the rest of them look like drunken amateurs. At one point, Ethan watched her leap onto a cargo crate, her boots barely making a sound as she landed. A pirate raised his blaster to fire at her, but she kicked it out of his hands with a sharp snapping motion, sending the weapon skittering across the floor. Before the man could react, she followed up with a spinning kick that caught him square in the chest. The impact sent him sprawling to the ground, where he stayed, groaning and clutching his ribs. Ethan popped out from behind cover long enough to shoot another pirate in the shoulder, sending the guy spinning into a bulkhead. "You know," he called out to Lirae, "most people just stay behind the diplomat and hope they don't get shot." Lirae didn't even glance his way. She was already moving toward her next target, her compact blaster firing off 2 quick shots that dropped a pair of advancing pirates. Most diplomats don't end up on ships captained by people who steal highly valuable and highly dangerous cargo. "Oh, so now, this is my fault," Ethan shouted back, ducking as a plasma bolt hissed inches over his head. "Focus, Captain," she said coolly, her tone so calm it made Ethan's teeth grind. Yeah, focus," he muttered, firing off another shot. Easy for her to say. She's not the one trying to keep this flying hunk of junk in one piece. The fight showed no signs of slowing down. On his Pirates kept pouring in, their numbers seemingly endless. Ethan darted from one piece of cover to the next, his blaster growing uncomfortably warm in his hand. He couldn't remember the last time he'd been in a fight this chaotic. At one point, a burly pirate lunged at him from behind, the man's blade glinting ominously in the dim, flickering light. Ethan's reflexes kicked in too late. He was still turning when he realized he wasn't going to make it in time. Oh, crap. Before the blade could connect, Lirae appeared out of nowhere. She grabbed the pirate's arm mid-swing, twisting it with a sharp, practiced motion that elicited a satisfying crack. The blade clattered to the floor as the man let out a strangled cry of pain. Ethan barely had time to blink before Lirae flipped the pirate onto his back, with an efficiency that made it look easy. She pinned him to the floor with one knee, her expression cold and unreadable as she delivered a single, brutal punch to his jaw. The man went limp, his head lolling to the side as consciousness abandoned him. Ethan stared at her, momentarily speechless. What the hell was that? Lirae stood smoothly, brushing imaginary dust from her sleeve as if she hadn't just flattened a man twice her size. She glanced at Ethan, her expression as calm and composed as ever. You're welcome. Ethan shook his head, still trying to wrap his brain around what he'd just seen. Remind me never to get on your bad side, he muttered, his voice tinged with a mix of awe and disbelief. Noted, Lirae said simply, already scanning the corridor for their next threat. A pirate rounded the corner ahead of them, his blaster raised. Lirae fired first, the bolt striking the man square in the chest. He crumpled to the floor without so much as a scream. Ethan let out a low whistle. Seriously? Where the hell did you learn to fight like that? Is there some kind of diplomat combat academy I don't know about? Lirae didn't answer right away, her focus still on the corridor ahead. When she finally spoke, her tone was clipped. It's part of the job. Ethan snorted, firing off a shot at another pirate who dared to poke his head out. Yeah, I'm sure all diplomats are trained to disarm pirates and break their arms. That's totally standard. Captain, she said, her voice carrying that edge of authority that always made him bristle, perhaps you should focus on the fight instead of my credentials. Right. Because this is going so well, Ethan muttered under his breath, firing another shot. The corridor was chaos, but the tide was slowly starting to turn in their favor. Tarek's shotgun boomed from somewhere down the hall, followed by the sound of a pirate screaming in pain. Zara's shaky but determined voice came over the comms. Got one! Ha! Take that, you scumbag! Don't celebrate yet, Zara. Ethan barked into his comm. We're not out of this mess. Another pirate charged at them, this one wielding a heavy club. Ethan raised his blaster, but Lirae was already moving. She stepped into the pirate's path, sidestepping the first swing before ducking under the second. Her movements were impossibly fast, and before the pirate could recover, she delivered a sharp elbow to his gut, followed by a knee to his face. The man dropped like a sack of rocks. Ethan watched her, his blaster still half raised. You know, he said, tilting his head, it's starting to feel like I'm the sidekick here. Lirae turned to him, her expression unreadable. If you'd like to switch roles, Captain, I'd be happy to let you take the lead. Ethan opened his mouth to respond, but stopped short as another group of pirates appeared at the far end of the corridor, their weapons raised. On second thought, he muttered, raising his blaster, I think I'll stick to what I'm good at. Which is? Lirae asked dryly, already aiming her weapon. Not dying, Ethan replied, firing the first shot as the fight kicked off again. Eventually the crew managed to push the pirates back, forcing them to retreat to their ship. The sound of their boots clanging against the stellar horizon's scarred hull faded into the distance as the airlock sealed behind them. A tense silence settled over the ship, broken only by the faint hiss of venting steam and the occasional groan of stressed metal. The corridors were a mess, littered with scorch marks, shattered crates, and the occasional unconscious pirate who hadn't made it back to their ship in time. The stellar horizon was battered, smoking, and one good hit away from falling apart, but it was still in one piece. Ethan slumped against a bulkhead, his blaster dangling loosely in his hand as he tried to catch his breath. Every muscle in his body ached. His lungs burned, and his shirt was plastered to his back with sweat. He wiped a hand across his forehead, smearing dirt and soot into his already disheveled hair. "Well?" he said, glancing at Lirae, who stood a few feet away. Her posture was as straight and composed as ever, though her clothes were singed and her hair slightly mussed. "That was fun." "Define fun," she replied, brushing a strand of shimmering hair out of her face with the casual elegance of someone who hadn't just been fighting for their life. Ethan chuckled, the sound coming out more like a wheeze. "All right, I'll admit it. You're full of surprises." Lirae arched an eyebrow. The faintest sheen of sweat on her brow, the only indication that she'd been in the same fight. "I'll take that as a compliment." "It's all you're getting," Ethan said, pushing himself off the wall with a groan. His knees protested the movement, but he ignored them. He holstered his blaster with a practiced motion, then gestured down the corridor. "Now come on. Let's see how bad the damage is before Tarek starts screaming about how we're all doomed." Lirae nodded and fell into step beside him as they made their way toward the engine room. The ship was eerily quiet now, the aftermath of the battle hanging in the air like a physical weight. Smoke curled lazily from a nearby console, and the faint flicker of sparking wires illuminated the corridor in sporadic bursts. As they walked, Ethan couldn't help but glance at Lirae out of the corner of his eye. She was still calm, still composed, but there was something different about her now. Something fierce. Her usual veneer of diplomatic coolness had cracked just enough to let a spark show through, a sharp, dangerous edge he hadn't seen before. "Guess you're not just a pretty face after all," he muttered, half to himself. Lirae turned her head slightly, fixing him with a look that was equal parts amusement and exasperation. "Was that supposed to be a compliment?" "Take it however you want," Ethan replied with a smirk, though his tone was lighter than usual. "Just saying you saved my ass back there. Twice, if we're counting." "I wasn't keeping score," she said smoothly, though the faintest hint of a smile tugged at her lips. "Good thing I was," Ethan shot back. "Otherwise you'd probably try to take all the credit." They turned a corner, stepping over a fallen crate that had spilled its contents, mostly spare parts and a few dubious-looking snacks, across the floor. Ethan's gaze lingered on the mess for a moment before he shook his head. "Sarah's gonna have a field day cleaning this up. If she's still alive," Lirae quipped, her tone dry. "Fair point," Ethan muttered, picking up his pace. The door to the engine room hissed open as they approached, revealing a scene that was somehow even worse than Ethan had expected. Tarek was crouched over one of the consoles, his face smeared with grease and his expression a mix of frustration and barely contained rage. Sparks rained down from the ceiling, and the air was thick with the smell of burnt wiring and overheated metal. "About damn time," Tarek growled, not even looking up as they entered. "This ship's held together with duct tape and prayers, and those bastards just kicked it in the teeth." "Good to see you're still in one piece, Tarek," Ethan said, stepping over a pile of tools scattered across the floor. "How bad is it?" Tarek finally looked up, his dark eyes narrowing as he jabbed a wrench in Ethan's direction. "Bad. Real bad. The main drive's fried, the secondaries limping, and half the damn power relays are toast. Oh, and don't even get me started on the hull breaches. If I had a credit for every hole those pirate bastards punched in this ship, I could retire to a nice beach planet and never look at another engine again." "So bad then," Ethan said, rubbing the back of his neck. Glad you're keeping up, Captain Obvious, Tarek snapped. He turned his glare on Lirae, who was standing quietly near the doorway. And you? You're supposed to be the fancy diplomat. Any chance you can talk the universe into giving us a break for once? Lirae didn't flinch under his glare. If I could, I would have started with the pirates. Tarek let out a derisive snort but didn't argue the point. He turned back to the console, muttering under his breath as he started pulling wires and twisting connectors with practiced efficiency. Ethan crossed his arms, leaning against the wall as he watched Tarek work. So, what's the verdict? Are we dead in the water, or do you have some miracle up your sleeve? I'll get us moving, Tarek grumbled. But it's gonna be rough. Don't expect warp anytime soon. Naughty, hello, getting worries, naughty now shagali. Hell, don't expect the engines to do anything more than cough and sputter for the next few hours. Great, Ethan said, dragging a hand down his face. Guess we're stuck here until further notice. Which means, Lirae chimed in, her voice as calm as ever, we should probably assess the rest of the ship. Make sure there aren't any surprises. Ethan shot her a look. You mean more pirates? Or explosives, Lirae said matter-of-factly. Ethan groaned. Wow. I didn't she? I so. You just had to say it, didn't you? She didn't respond, but the faint curve of her lips suggested she was enjoying his discomfort, just a little too much. Fine, Ethan said, pushing himself off the wall. Let's go check the cargo bay. Tarek? Keep us posted. Yeah, Tarek muttered, already elbow-deep in wiring. Just don't get yourselves killed. I am not cleaning up the mess. Ethan glanced at Lirae as they headed for the door. You think he means that? Undoubtedly, she replied, her tone dry. Ethan chuckled despite himself, shaking his head as they walked out. You know, for a diplomat, you're surprisingly good at making people want to punch you. Practice, Lirae said, her voice perfectly even. Ethan smirked. But he didn't press the issue. After all, she had just saved his life, twice.